Well, yeah, it's working. Thank you very much for the three of you for the presentations. Super interesting, all the difference, but also the overlaps between them. And talking about overlaps, something that caught my attention was, Ruben, your images about the diversity that becomes the new normal, let's say, because it reminds me the advertisement of United Colors of Benetton, somehow. So I want to use this part of your lecture to ask you, Hans, because you talk about the appropriation of the appropriated. No? So we have seen in the recent years that, for example, in certain communities in Africa, there is a need to appropriate and to transform, reuse, recycle things. But somehow in the Western Union, we are appropriating again these things, and it has become a kind of trend. In every hipster neighborhood in Central Europe, we can see pictures and stores selling these kind of objects. How is the relationship between these communities and the things they are producing? Is there any impact for this appropriation from the Western Union again, or they are totally dissociated and they don't receive any income or feedback there? Is just a trend here, a colonial trend, or there is any relationship? How do you see this, how this thing has evolved in the past years, that we have become this process of gentrification and hipsterization and everything here in the local communities in Western Europe?
Yes, thank you very much. I think recently we had this public dispute. I think people even went to court to decide whether the appropriation of music, of small slices of 1 or 2 seconds of a song into another song, whether this is legal or not. And as a matter of fact, appropriation art has become an important trend within the art world. However, okay, let me say first, this is one of the things that attracts me, and this is why I work since some years with this notion of cultural appropriation, because it's something that is going in both directions. It's not only that people in the South appropriate things from the North, but it's the opposite direction also. People in the North appropriate things from the South. And in both directions, we have also the question about legitimacy. Is it okay that we use Aborigines art as a carpet here in Germany? Is it okay that things like YouTube and other media are used in Africa freely, and so on? So you have in both directions of appropriation, and in both sides you have this dispute about legitimacy of it. However, I would insist on making a difference with regard to the observations or the examples I have shown. Most of these examples have to do with the absolute poverty of the people. And appropriation is not always something about doing fashionable things. Appropriation has to do also with, yes, the incapacity or the impossibility to reach the original items. I would like to refer to the example of the smartphones or mobile phones. And in these West African countries where I work, it's ironically called Au revoir France, goodbye France. This means, okay, we take the leftovers from Europe and we reassemble these parts in order to make something out of it that functions more or less. Perhaps it functions for some months and then we have to repair it again and so. And I have even talked with development experts, and they said, okay, all these recycled things, all these reassembled objects, they don't have the same duration, they don't have the same reliability in their function. So there might be kind of deficit, but it's also a consciousness. When you appropriate involuntarily, you get into relation to another culture. So the sandals made out of car tires, ironically, they are called carcobo, which means what's left over from the car, because none of these people who use sandals from tire caoutchouc, none of this is able to afford a car himself. And he knows wearing this kind of clothes is a kind of articulation or to admit the status of absolute poverty. So as a matter of fact, appropriation is universal. Appropriation maintains and reconfirms difference, but not always difference on a level of fashionable things, not even on the level of voluntary segregation or differentiation. Sometimes it's simply by need, necessity.
Thank you so much. You mentioned a word that connects perfectly with the question I want to ask you, Ruben, legitimacy. Because in your book you say that communication is global, we can say universal in the context here, but never neutral. And also you have been researching on the importance of storytelling and narratives in the way that these stories can reach a wider audience and have a political impact. So I was wondering, for example, the role of the people who is devoted to create these narratives, and specifically I was thinking because the whole day we have been talking about the politics in one way or the other. For example, the situation that has the debate recently emerged of the role of WikiLeaks in the US elections, for example, it has raised a big debate, and how important is that these narratives, this storytelling that can change and are not based in legal rights because they transgress the right for privacy, but they are somehow legitimate because we need to know. So which are your thoughts about this storytelling, these narratives, and the difference between the legal and the legitimate in terms of communication to have a political impact?
Yeah, I think first of all, I think it's important to not to understand that terms like legitimize or legitimate are related to power structures. So at the moment that we say that WikiLeaks was first neutral but now is not neutral, kind of assumes that was always neutral. And the kind of point of my book is that we have to seriously doubt if we can use these terms. I think I also want to kind of just also say that I don't also talk about global or universal communication. I think it's very important that that is the kind of a fictional concept. So I think what we should really think about is that there's all these mechanisms at work. Primarily at the moment, these are capitalists. You know, also where we talk about appropriation, that drive these stories. But when it comes to the power of, let's say, stories or visual communication, especially now, and then I'm talking also about polarized political climate, I think it's very strange because at the same time, I mean, I think everybody feels this kind of powerlessness of like, people are not educated or people don't see the right media or the specific media, but then I also have to admit in my Facebook feed, I don't see any pro-Trump. Although there's a very large populist contingent in, you know, not just in Holland, but in Germany and everywhere in Europe. So at the moment we start splitting society in two, this also becomes a fictional construct. And I think it's very important as designers, we don't try to kind of turn that into propaganda, but we also try to listen, you know, we try to understand. And I think for me, visual communication, and that also relates to the WikiLeaks thing, is where we also have to try to learn to listen and to be open to dialogue and not just to send only. So that we should also wonder about, in the age of information overload, how it can be possible that you have a complete difference of opinion in what is true. You can have these discussions about a certain event and people have like 5 sources from the internet that back them up on both sides of the argument. So then it becomes also, it's maybe not even about what is truth, but it's also about are we talking to each other, or are we just looking for arguments to confirm our own worldview?
Yeah, this is a good point, I think. And also talking about information overload, I want to go with you because, for example, in the first of your projects, the Zizek House or the House of Doing Nothing, you talk about doing nothing, about withdrawal, about certain kind of retreat. But when you start developing the project and you reach to the basic elements of the house, they are all related with communication and connection. So at the end, for me, it's a kind of super interesting contradiction between the concept of retreat and all the tools for self-exposure we have. So can you explain a little bit more this, or getting deep in this contradiction or this dichotomy?
Yes, for this dichotomy, there is a lot written about it. I think all the bibliography about immaterial labor is there. So I think that, of course, we speak about a body which doesn't move so much, but yes, it's kind of seeing somebody who is somnambulant. How we say this? It's a kind in a kind of immobile, somnambulant condition. And this comes to be the minimal house of today. So I mean, we thought that the house machine of Le Corbusier was an apartment, but finally it becomes a bed, a kind of big bed, yeah, an extended bed. So I think that, and also this bed includes work, includes a lot of things but you don't move so much. So doing nothing maybe means more, in my sense, not moving so much. You are connected. Your immobility is connected to all this infrastructure, which can bring you food also. It can bring, I mean, it's a kind of way of really, I think that Walter Prigge in the beginning was speaking about the hotel room. I think that the bed is for me the most important part of today's minimal thought, let's say. It's something like going from all the culture of architecture to a kind of culture of immobility, which is related to all this sphere that is the infrastructure today. So, of course, I need to find politics in this. So I think that we have to establish again a system of a different system, but I don't want to be a moralist in the same time. A different system to bring together people. So that's my abstract protocol thinking. That because I'm thinking that these scenographies would help even, you know, the correlation to a different piazza that would be a system of tables, or there are more protocols that I didn't have time to show.
The fiction you presented to us, the imaginary, reminded me very much to this somnambule consumer of Walter Benjamin. He's precisely describing that the consumer in Walter Benjamin's world is walking and sleeping simultaneously, and he's looking at these objects, becoming greedy to get them, but forgets his own existence as the people laying in these extended beds you're designing. So you are realizing to some extent, or figuring precisely what has been thought by Walter Benjamin something like 80 years ago.
Yeah, I hope it's not so negative. My point of view, of course, it has a dystopic reading, and I try to avoid it as much as possible. I know that it exists, but for me the question is, what can one do within this kind of condition while it's getting more, and he's getting or she's getting deeper into it. So it's like a kind of dream from which maybe he can control a part of it, maybe, I don't know. So that's why I was telling that I have two sides. This protocol idea, the one is the description of the nowadays society, which is barbaric in a way. It's that we all are included in predetermined content structures, that we only operate in this kind of things, and the web helps a lot. And then if we can, since it seems so difficult to go out of this kind of structure, if we can really design different ways of structuring these protocols, or different protocols. Can we think about a web that will be different in a way, something like this?
Thank you, Aricia. I would love to open the discussion to the public before we continue with another round of, is there a, yeah.
Okay, thanks to all of you. I have two questions. The first concerning the house to do nothing in this bed. There were all these naked women in it. And I'd like to know what they are supposed to mean and why they're there. I suppose they're not supposed to symbolize Zizek. I sort of hope they're not just any other prop or object, so please explain. And the other question concerns the Aneignung and the cell phones. I mean, cell phones are pretty... I was wondering why you were basically using these two photos of this supposedly African guy and then the woman with a headscarf with their cell phones. Because cell phones are very new for everyone, right? I mean, they weren't there for 30 years ago or so. So just a new means of communication, which is around worldwide now. And you didn't show yourself with a cell phone or me or so. So why? So I assumed that you would imagine that that this African guy or supposedly African guy and this woman with the headscarf using the cell phone, they are appropriating it in a way, but we might maybe not be appropriating it or so. But I'm wondering if that would be then a correct interpretation of it, because again, it's new, it's global. Why is it? You know, I mean, it's not an indigenous German thing to have a cell phone or so. So where is appropriation happening and where isn't it? In a context of global consumer culture where, you know, some means of communication like this thing or of playing or of a lot of African countries paying, where this is just used everywhere and made available by global capitalism everywhere.
May I start? I have this question. I have this question in Germany always, so I will repeat my answer. It's not only naked woman, it's naked men, it's the swimming pool and much more cliches that are ensembled in this kind of sweet prison. So it's in purpose, it's just a kind of conglomeration of cliches. So of course it's made beautiful, but it's poisonous. That's, I don't know if this answers a bit, but I think that I didn't want to do a kind of imaginary thing where, you know, it's not positive, it's full of poison. So, of course, it's much more than what you see. It's not only naked woman, it's a number of cliches that are accumulated in this design.
Okay, I think the answer is simple. I had the mobile phone as an example for Germany in the rubric of Benennung, labeling, and I said that this specific word, handy, is kind of appropriating a global thing and making it German by imagination of something global and something Anglicism. I don't know how to say this, but you understand. Though this is a language level, and the other pictures I showed are rather on the incorporation level or in the wie sagt man, Raub- und Diebstahl, theft level, and so on. So you have different levels and you have different domains and you have different examples. I would never exclude Germany from this. And in contrast to this, I would say that we are still lacking a universal idea of what the mobile phone does to the society. And I'm quite arguing against development discourse who explains mobile phones are an information device in developing countries. If these development agents would consider their own practice, their own daily routines with mobile phones, they would know it's rather something of stabilizing social relations, communicating emotions, than gathering information. And I'm quite astonished why people assume that in Africa information might be more important, or mobile phone transmitted information might be more important than, for example, in Germany. So I see that's really a split off in discourse and evaluation of mobile phones in between developing countries and consumer societies that I do not accept. And I recently published on that, saying that the development discourse on mobile phones is quite misleading because they don't have a precise idea on how mobile phones are used in Africa. And the difference of usage between Europe and Africa are not so great.
Before a second round of questions for the audience, this conversation made me think about something very important, I think, because, you know, we have a very brief lecture, we have a photo that can be interpreted in many ways, or a render that can be, and you specialize in visual communication. And also to explain what I'm thinking now, following this panel, we will have a lecture about algorithmic universalism. So I wanted to ask you, how you manage, for example, from the field of visual communication and activism, you can design the most wonderful posters for I don't know, for an action or for try to communicate something, but it's a reality that nowadays we are interacting also with the post-human or with the algorithms and artificial intelligence. So, for example, if I made a search in Google, perhaps the same poster you designed for one purpose appears mixed up with in other context. So, how you try to manage or control this way of communication, or do you think there is not possibility to control it, or which is your approach to this new reality we are dealing nowadays?
Thank you. Yeah, first of all, I think that the controls the whole concept of the way modernist design was established. So, and the reason why I'm writing the book now, even though these ideas go way back in cultural studies, anthropology, communication science, is that now through the internet, what we actually see in Holland is that we have this Black Pete, Schwarze Piet, which is very similar to the racist stereotype I showed about Native Americans, which has been criticized for a long time in Holland, but because the majority does not agree this is racist, like ignoring its racist connotation. But now there's a change because these things go on Facebook, they go on social media, so they end up everywhere else in the world. And then they say, no, it's not meant for America. It's just meant for. So you cannot make that argument again. You cannot produce an image that is sexist or racist, and then say, no, sorry, this was not meant for you. This was just meant for my guy friends. This is not how it works. So I think this is about the responsibility of representation. And of course, communication is a volatile process. I mean, any kind of way of intonation, even in language, can have a wrong effect on different people, even within a certain area of, I don't know, Baden or Württemberg or whatever. So I don't say there's like one answer. And we also talked about that earlier, about the idea of intercultural communication. There's just books out, like how do I communicate with other cultures, which is, of course, written by a Dutch guy, meant for Westerners to go to non-Western countries, but this is a very problematic book because it's like it is being used at business schools because people want to sell their products in Japan, in China, etc. So we should not confuse the idea of mutual understanding with domination, or the idea that we have to try to control a kind of narrative, where maybe it's about trying to listen and also trying to kind of create a more flexible dialogue, I think. Yeah.
I think we have time for the last round of questions for the audience.
Maybe just a short comment. I don't know if you know that on the work on the bed by Aristide, that OMA is designing a big headquarter for Springer, the press company in Berlin, and we had a piece by Andreas Rumphuber in one of the issues describing how the CEO of Springer was traveling to the Silicon Valley to see how the work of the future is being made, and they produced a PR video presented online where the two chief editors of the big newspaper Bild is lying in bed. One is asleep and one is working on his computer, and this and accompanied by a slogan which goes, to become a leading digital company, you don't need to launch your business from a garage in California. So this short sequence, as Andreas Rumphuber wrote, reviews the whole truth of work in the digital and media spheres. It should be conceived as starting from the bed. So the bed is not only the ultimate worker's utopia, but it's also the reality behind the origin of our digital and media economy. And so we have this story that Steve Wozniak, one of the founder of Apple, was paid to tell jokes from his bed. And while he was running his dire joke business, he was also inventing the the first Macintosh. Maybe that connects us to the next panel, but I also wondering, maybe not only in the terms that both seems to be similar, maybe Zizek is only another die or joke figure in our time. I don't know.
Yeah. Yes, thank you for this remark. For me, yes, I told you that what I try to depict, and then maybe we could discuss this also between us. But I think that when I try to do this kind of design to answer a kind of fragment of Zizek, I do not want to give a simple. Let's say in the same time, I want to design a prison, and I want to design a very desirable house, but in the way that, you know, the cliché every one of us has in his mind, function in a kind of yes, result. So I try to balance between something that is terribly rejectable and something that is wanted, and I try to design in between these two lines. This is first of all to make the description of the work. So I'm trying to find where this is at the same time inviting and at the same time very problematic, and it includes a kind of critique of itself. Can we exaggerate so much so that the critique to itself emerges from the design? This is from let's say from the point of view of description of the project. Yes, about the taking over of all these strategies from the market. It's absolutely what I also observe. I think that my other project that I couldn't have time to show you, it's the urban hall that also was proposed for Athens. It always has a kind of Robin Hood, very good, how to say, common intention. But I think that at the same time it can give, if it's not. I don't know if you know this project, I'm sorry. It's a kind of occupation of real streets of the city for common use, which could be, again, protocoled and announced in the web. So it will be a kind of system that could make the locality of each part of the city. You would have the function. It's a kind of changing function. It's never stable, but it's programmed through the web. It's a kind of theater of protocols that performs in the web. And I thought that in Athens there were many places where you needed at this time open-air hospitals. So because it was really people suffering. But I thought that maybe when yes, when the wound is healed in a way, it could have a kind of theatrical part. And I saw this kind of change as a very good friend of mine, Yoshi Tsukamoto, did the BMW thing that is very related to the BMW Guggenheim. You remember this kind of, it's very similar as a project, and it's very well accepted. It's work for the market in a way, and it's much more yes, addressed to the reality. So what I think is that all the intention of the social understanding of the community, of different commons, etc., is not so easily formed in this particular moment. At the opposite, the market finds way to quickly crystallize all these ideas. I don't know what to do with this. Yeah.
The market is the new universal. Well, I think we are almost on time, so thank you very much. I think we have a break of 15 minutes, and then we'll meet here again for the last lecture and the closing panel discussion. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you all.